All right, everyone. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone back to the Behind the Grow podcast with me, Eric Coulombe, and my guest today, Dr. Av Singh, who I am super excited to both have on the podcast, tell you all about him, and him to tell you all about some of the great things he's worked on and is currently working on. Before I do, Av, I have a sponsor for this podcast.
Oh, great.
Someone you know well, everyone knows well because they've been around since forever, is PremierTech. So the good people of ProMix had asked me to sponsor the podcast, and we're putting together a nice little package for them. So in the beginning, I'd just like to say thank you to them. They are traditionally known as a peat a company. They've been around for over 100 years.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow, amazing.
Yeah, out of Quebec, and some of the old pictures and the history of that company is really amazing. I mean, that's why, if you're going to get a sponsor, that's a sort of a company, I'm happy to have, proud to have. And of course, they've transitioned into the peat and core business over the last kind of 10 years or so, and they have the ready to use stuff, and basically ProMix has you covered for whatever your medium needs are, assuming you want peat or cocoa. So there you go. There's my sponsor, which again we're super happy to have. So Av, I'll let you say a little bit about yourself in a sec, but I just wanted to go over some of the stuff I read about you, and then a little bit about how when we first met and I got all this information sent to me. You have quite a career behind you and in front of you, but you've done a lot of stuff, and
I'm old.
I don't think enough people know just how much you've done unless they come to the Grow Ops and have met you there or some of the other shows. You should be asked to be on a podcast every week, as far as I'm concerned, with the knowledge you have and whatnot. Everywhere you look, you'll get these three things: 200 peer-reviewed papers, 600 workshops and conferences. You have guest lectured at over 30 universities and have visited over 2,500 farms.
Yeah, I'm sure those numbers are even lower than they truly are. So yeah, definitely gifted and privileged to be able to do all that.
Yeah. You're also one of the more humble, if not the most humble guy I've met.
I think in speaking about humility, you never mentioned that this is an award-winning podcast.
This podcast is about you. It's not about me. So yes, Av, we did just win Podcast of the Year at the Grow Up Awards, which I'm super happy about, and it's fixed. It's fixed.
Yeah.
Not fixed. I don't give Randy any money.
Congratulations.
But yeah, no, it was really great. It's nice to get that because it's voted from your peers, and obviously people like it. And I listen to it. I'm not sure why they like it, but that sounds like you talking about your moderating. You're also the executive director of the Scotia Cannabis Alliance. Now, is that part of the National Federation of Cannabis Farmers? Are these separate?
No, that's a unique organization. It just started up as an opportunity for license holders in the province to get together. And then we realized we can actually access some funding through the Nova Scotia Liquor Commission. Through that funding, we were able to start doing some lobbying. And so despite the fact that our funding comes from the Nova Scotia Liquor Commission, most of our lobbying is trying to work with the provincial government to make the Nova Scotia cannabis sector stronger.
And okay, well, two questions, and I'll just go right into this: is lobbying and stronger. So those are what are you lobbying for? When you say stronger, how do you make this industry stronger?
When I say lobbying, that would be working, towards the Nova Scotia provincial government. Meeting with the finance minister, agriculture minister, or the premier, trying to have those discussions about how we might be able to get back some of the excise tax dollars that the provinces are receiving.
Okay.
And then our other sort of trying to make the sector stronger is by working with the NSLC to ensure that we have probably a disproportionate number of SKUs available for Nova Scotia license holders, so that local comes in first, and perhaps trying to always beat them down on their margins as well. So,
do you feel every province should have a local first? approach, or as we're trying to do in Canada right now, which is kind of take down those borders, I know we don't import anything into
Right.
Canada. It's all Canadian product in Canada. But do you not think maybe you're limiting the Nova Scotia customers, the retail?
No question. I think we've got some amazing growers out there, and for the longest time we've wanted to have a lot of product that comes from Quebec or BC and other provinces, and never been able to access those.
Right.
But I think in terms of our own local consumers, they want to have access to the shop that's down the road as well. They have a real sense of wanting to support that, and that's not always the case, right? So you could be farming in Sydney, Nova Scotia, out on Cape Breton Island, and not have access to the most local cannabis that's being grown. So there's always that type of discussion with the NSLC to say how can we get our SKUs very personalized to support the farms that are right there, because we don't have Farmgate here. That's one of our other biggest challenges. I know Quebec doesn't either, I think, but most provinces are leaning towards that, if not having it.
I
And
know I'm
yeah,
sure that the majority of people who listen to this know, but I know there are some, smaller growers or people. Do you wanna give us a quick r explanation of what Farmgate is for those who don't know? Because some people don't know.
y- y- yeah. I wonder if probably British Columbia might have been the first, but soon thereafter, New Brunswick has jumped on board. Ontario has it. I believe Alberta has it as well, and it allows the opportunity for a cultivator. So you have to, yeah, I think in all provinces, you actually have to be cultivating to have an access to a farm gate license.
Yeah.
And you can have processing, of course, yourself. And then you have the opportunity to sell your own product. Um, in the case of New Brunswick, you can bring in other people's products, but you have to then repackage it and put it in under your own label and stuff. It just there's less of a margin taken by the province. Usually, they're not taking as much in terms of taxes, and it does allow for that opportunity for that farmer to be able to engage with their consumer and chat a little bit more about what products they're growing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge plus and should be just a right for all these farmers, and not to be held back by the government just because the government wants to make a slice of the action on the sales, as they do with a lot of the liquor boards and whatnot
Right.
also. So,
Well, and when you compare it to liquor, of course, we have only 80 Health Canada regulated areas where you can purchase cannabis, and in the province, we probably have 3,000 different places where you could purchase alcohol. So
it's I mean, Quebec is even I think we only have 100 or 80 and they've opened up in Quebec, which obviously with the
okay,
size and the
yeah,
population
wow,
of Quebec. And if
yeah.
you've ever been into an SQDC, I mean, apart from the fact that you can walk in and buy cannabis legally, which is cool, they're horrible.
Okay, yeah.
There's yeah, you can't it's just it's like almost I mean, pharmacies are more interesting in the sense, like, you can't see anything. Yes, they have the wall of the products and minor explanations, but it's a really poor retail experience, there's
I think Nova Scotia has realized that that was their kind of the post office type system. You've got a big phone directory that you'd go through. The bud tenders didn't always have enough information provided to them to give a good educational decision on what the client might want. Relative to if you went in there, they would have a wine sommelier usually, or whiskey aficionado who could speak to what somebody might want. They are now looking at creating a better model to give a better consumer experience, but at the same time, um, they in their expansion they went from 50 to 85 stores. Those other 35 stores are more like you get a Snap-on Tools um, shelf, and that's all it. It's not age gated, so therefore they can't even talk about what's there. But It's progress. What they've already seen now, Nova Scotia is doing a more targeted effect on the illicit market. They've been targeting Indigenous communities to reduce some of the non-Health Canada regulated product. Um, but what we've also seen is that with all these new locations, cannabis sales have gone up about 10%. So
Makes sense.
yeah,
Yeah, more
yeah.
access. Well, like I said, I hope that the SQDC in Quebec one day realizes that they don't need to have such a hold on this, and they can really open it up and let people have their own retail shops and have entrepreneurs making the money instead of the government making the money, which I find super annoying.
And when you think of it, I think many of us in rural areas as well as urban settings, we do get a lot of stuff through the mail, and if we're allowed to do more access through mail, then I think that'll also help in distribution.
Yeah, I mean, I have friends here in Quebec who have mail ordered from BC on more than one occasion. I'm also like, "Is that legal?"
Yeah, yeah,
And the answer is no,
yeah, yeah.
"Where you getting that from?" You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I believe, we were talking because New Brunswick also has a cannabis alliance and they've just started that up. And one of their board members was mentioning that New Brunswickers have access to over 200 different websites to order cannabis by mail. So
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Yeah, I mean, I guess
none of them being legal or, you know,
okay.
Health
That's
Canada regulated.
alright. Well, I feel even though it's been since 2018, we are still really early days on the full rec distribution model that we have in Canada, as it is quite different in each province, and then they do seem to be changing. So I think we're probably far away from what it will end up being, which I hope is similar to the way you could get alcohol,
Hmm.
and again, it's still limited in Quebec or in Ontario. If I want to buy whiskey, I still have to go to the SAQ in Quebec. I can't buy it at a local store. Whereas if you go to the US and you want alcohol, you can go into a general store and
Yeah.
it's more alcohol than you've ever seen in your life. There's
Are-
drive through. You can get
Well,
whiskey drive through in Florida.
don't they sell wine in the Depanay? No,
Depanneur.
Depanay?
They sell
No.
lower. I don't
Okay.
understand how you get registered to be a wine in a they call it a dep, but it's not the good stuff.
Okay.
That was
Yeah.
kind of funny. It's okay, I'm sure. I'm not a wine connoisseur
In a
or
pinch, it'll do in a pinch.
it'll get the job done. I was curious because when I was again looking up some of the stuff you've done, the International Cannabinoid Research Society, is that something you still are involved with?
Yeah, only in the context of occasionally reviewing a paper. So
Okay.
if anything comes my way, that's what we will be involved with. But yeah, I think it was more popular just at the turn when we thought we were going to actually have journals dedicated to cannabinoid research, and it's still going on, but it's not as active.
Yeah, it's that is I would say in the whole cannabis sphere of information and things to discuss and what's interesting to me, although I love growing and I could talk and we're going to talk growing and organic growing and it is because there's I studied Hinduism
Oh, did you? Okay,
in
cool.
university, and I still remember, and it's a line I use for growing now, is that one professor said, "There's as many Hindu gods as there is Hindus."
Right. Yeah.
Meaning that there is no rule, there is no set, and of course there is as many growing techniques as there are growers. And this year when I did the grow off, I don't know if
Mhm.
you're
Yeah.
familiar with the grow
Yeah.
off and with the Growers Guild, which I love the Growers Guild, and I'll have Alan on one day. Um, it was amazing and and humbling because I didn't do so hot. My Pepe Le Kush turned out okay. And I saw some of the people's results. These are just people at home. These are not
Mhm.
sophisticated. They are ultra sophisticated growers, but their setups are quite.
Right.
And some of these people were knocking out. Where I got maybe 22% THC. And again, come on to how important is THC. After they were getting into the 30s. And I said,
Okay.
how does your plant even, why does it even look like your plant? Never
Right.
mind
Right.
did I
Yeah.
even come close and I always found it really, really amazing. And all that is so interesting. But compared to cannabinoid research and really understanding things like Entourage terpenes, cannabinoids, the synergistic effect of all of them on our bodies, and then our own biology and differences, how we react to these things, and then how and where does the medical side come in on all of it, to me is absolutely the most interesting and important subject in cannabis.
Yeah. And we're not even close to starting. And that's what kind of, scares me, that we are trying to do things like transgenics and other forms of genetic engineering to change the cannabis genome, when we don't really understand the genome itself, the cannabis genome, and then not, and especially how it interacts with us. So I
Well,
feel like there's still so much research that has to be done before we start tinkering around with the plant.
I have a friend, his name is Lewis, who works for Shogun Nutrients in the UK, and he's one of these, I'm gonna say, like, hyper intelligent. I find him to be a very smart guy, and we have these conversations every time. And I am cup half full, he's cup half empty sort of guy. And I'm not
I
saying he's
can.
an ultra pessimist or a negative person. He's not a negative person at all. In fact, he's quite upbeat. But he believes that if you go back 100 years, we could go, you and I could have hung out and gone to an opium den together and smoked some opium and chilled out and gone home if we wanted to grow opium poppies and make our own opium and started this was all totally possible.
Mm.
And in fact, people did it. So he was even saying he was about 100 years ago or so, could have been a little further back than that, let's say the 1890s. So London was filled with opium dens.
Mm.
They
Mhm.
were everywhere.
Right.
And of course, fast forward 100 or so years, and it's one of the most restricted plants in the world. That and tobacco, which you're not allowed to grow and try, and either in many parts of the world, that's stupid to me. But I understand opium, I suppose. And he says, well, why won't that happen? Why won't that happen to cannabis? Why won't cannabis, at a certain point, we could say billionaire, we could say trillionaires now. So some guy who controls with some strings, some people in government will figure out how to just take complete control of the product, create the medicine, and somehow push down all the rights we've already. He thinks that's possible.
Yeah.
I don't think. I think Pandora's box is open. I think there's too many seeds out in the world. There's too many people doing this. You cannot turn this one back. Do you think it's possible this could be turned back?
Turn back in the sense of, when you look at it, how many of us are growing, um are actually seed saving with tomatoes or corn, or any of those. There's such a small population that's
Well,
actually doing that.
I'd be like, I am.
Are you?
I've seen tomato
Well,
seeds and I say,
and you really have to get into the genetics of it all. So of course most of our plants are now hybrids. Pulling that back and dehybridizing those and trying to, it's it's going to be hard to regulate that, but I could definitely see pharmaceutical companies and governments trying to take over a bit more control over cannabis.
yeah, and I know if for the people I've talked, especially, and again, it's anecdotal because there's not enough research to say that the cancer, for example, but I met a really interesting guy, Cyrus, in Toronto and again in Berlin, and he sent me a whole slew of research. I think it was his sister has been doing, and it's on RSO, Rick Simpson
Mm.
oil,
Mhm.
and cancer, and it is crazy what they've
Yeah,
done.
yeah.
I believe in South
Yeah.
Africa,
I
and
think I think they do say that, cannabis is probably one of the, top three most studied plants, commercial plants, right? So,
yeah, well,
uh,
what
right up with maize and alfalfa.
Yeah. Oh, I think I
Yeah.
just saw you say that on another podcast,
Yeah.
when I was
Well,
researching it.
it's
But, well, we still know next to nothing.
exactly. Yeah. And it's, I think, yeah, I mean, science is not overly objective, and therefore most of the studies, or many of the studies, were trying to prove that it in fact was, um, an evil drug. And of course, most most of the results have shown that it's not overly addictive. It's not causing as much harm as they think it does.
Yeah. Now,
I think it
again,
was interesting. I know that you've been trying to reach out to Riley Kirk, and I'm very interested in her breastfeeding study because that's a lot of the questions we get with young parents are, can
Well,
I continue to consume during pregnancy? Can I continue to consume during breastfeeding? And her very anecdotal studies showed that it was not passing through.
well, there, apart from anecdotal studies, when Celia was pregnant the first time, and it was something that we were concerned about, obviously, because I'm not just taking it lightly. Oh, I'm a big smoker. It's fine. Always, it's fine. I don't know. Um, so we did the research and tried to figure it out, and there is a country that has done a stack of research on breastfeeding, and
Oh, yeah,
it's Jamaica.
Jamaica has. Okay, yeah,
And so
I think we usually quote the Jamaica or South African studies,
yeah,
but
and then across the board was when pregnant, they found, I would say, no negative, issues.
mhm,
Breastfeeding was a little bit different, where that there was small amounts of stuff that did find its way into the breast milk, but not in any amount that would be a concern. But for some people, that'd be enough to say, well, I'll smoke a little bit when I'm pregnant because it helps with the nausea, or it helps with this, or it helps me
mm,
sleep, or it helps with the
yeah,
discomfort of being pregnant. But maybe I'll while I'm breastfeeding, I won't for those 2 years. It's a long time to take a break if you're a
right,
regular
right.
smoker. But yeah, anyway, I find all that to be really, really interesting. And something else I didn't know about you, that your original doctorate is in philosophy.
No, sorry,
Oh,
it's a PhD, but
in
in sustainable livestock production.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought I read it somewhere. And you do not have a degree in philosophy, though?
No, I don't.
You have nothing in philosophy.
Nothing. But your
Yeah,
PhD is a
internet,
doctorate. It's a doctorate in philosophy,
stupid
right?
internet.
Yeah. Well, I think that's just um
He's joking.
how we refer to PhDs.
Well, that's why it's I ask you in person, and that way you can get real answers from people. Don't rely on the internet. I thought we were going to get to talk about philosophy now,
I,
so
I yeah, no,
we definitely could
I'm not
talk about
not good at that.
philosophy anyway. Sure. So when you did this, and in livestock, which is interesting, how did you end up making a? I mean, I'm sure you still do stuff in regular agriculture, but it seems that you've really made a career in the cannabis sector. How did that happen?
I absolutely fell in love with the plant the first time. Um, I actually grew it, but probably before that, I think it was probably Peter Tosh's
Yeah.
legalize it that inspired me. But um, we weren't in a very cannabis friendly home in any way. We did have lots of pictures of Lord Shiva throughout the house, and you will see pictures with Lord Shiva, and there's a mortar and pestle right there, and that's for making bhang. Um, but it was actually working in organic agriculture, and working with organic farmers that always had some plants on the side, and would ask in my work as an extension specialist, and walking onto farms and talking about whatever deficiencies their tomatoes might have, or pests that their peppers are facing, and then relating that to cannabis. And then I actually entered into the sector when Organogram was looking for a just add water soil, and I helped to develop one of those for them,
Yeah. So,
which I think they only used for a couple of years, and then they went to a cocoa or stone wool.
and then obviously use synthetic nutrients now.
They do, I believe they use Canna. A little plug in there.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if they need to change their name.
I
Yeah,
well, yeah.
I
It
was-
it does seem to work well. They are I think they're the largest license holder in Canada. So
mm. I wanted to tell this in the beginning. I thought it was a funny story, and it backs up onto your humility a little bit. But it's how we met kind of the first time. I'd seen you around at trade shows. I knew who you were. I don't have too many people that I really look up to in this industry. You know, when I had Ted Smith on recently, he's one of my cannabis heroes and one of the greatest people in this industry in the world. He's a very special guy. And you were another one. I always thought, you know, I've heard you speak, and I just love the way you talk. It's so natural. You're quite funny. You always you joke around about yourself as being not a good moderator and da 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 da. And Adam Clark started writing for me, and I think through Adam you reached out to me,
Mm.
and I remember talking to you, and you asked me, "Oh, is it like I'd like to write for you?" I'm like, "Okay, Singh, you can write for me. Of course you can write for us." And you sent me your CV. You remember that? It was a fucking 4
I
pages of
I
stuff you've done. I'm like, "What the hell?"
I don't
Like,
actually do a good job of keeping that up to date either.
you did not
Um,
need to send me that.
but
But, yeah, it's pretty it's
I think I told you I might have been at the time when I was teaching cannabis, and honestly, if I had stumbled across garden culture earlier, I would have just said, okay, we are just going to look at back issues of garden culture and make that our course. Because it is, I told you this before. I think it'd be a phenomenal textbook, just taking a bunch of articles
well, I
and
think
like you said, um, you with a textbook, you tend to find very definitive, very dogmatic ways of how to cultivate, and with garden culture, you of course get a breadth of different growers, different opinions, and I think that's kind of the amazing thing about both gardening as well as the plant.
Well, I think, you know, now that we're doing this and recording this podcast, that I think we should just say now that, uh, yeah, let's do that. I'll task you. You could be your I've Sing Garden Culture Magazine, and help me pull out all that stuff that can make that textbook, and we'll make a special edition.
I think I think it'd be great. Now, unfortunately, I don't know if there's that many places that are offering a cannabis course anymore. Um,
No, no, I would just make it as a special edition magazine. It's like the textbook. It'd just be
well, you
bigger.
can. I think you've had so many different articles just on topping, and and I think that continues. I at the last grow up, I was very interested to learn that some people have stopped topping. They're still not necessarily going to a sea of green mentality, but they have increased their plant density, but stopped topping at all.
Really.
In a very short veg period, right? And I think yeah, Jorge Cervantes was kind of pushing that as well. Just
What's the logic behind not topping?
I think it has to do with just much like the sea of green mentality, but we seem to be getting just as many colas coming from the top, the apical as well as the top two lateral buds. That's enough for producing what we want to produce, and they seem to be getting higher yields. I need to learn a lot more about because I've always had I think I've made the equating the veg period as childhood, and I think Gabor Mate is one who made this comment that you spend most of your adulthood recovering from your childhood, and so that's why I think the flowering phase we focus so much on the flowering phase, but I'd like to focus more on the veg phase, make sure we got a good healthy plant, and blah blah blah. And now we're going back to I think a lot of people are going to a 1 week veg, if not if not no veg type mentality. So um
And sea of green. I mean, but I look at some of these farms that I've been in, and they're I mean, the plants are 6, 7 feet tall
okay. Yeah.
with everything cut out underneath. Now with the under canopy lighting, they're changing that a little bit, and they've pinched maybe twice, and so they'll have, you know, 8 or so on the top,
Hmm.
all trellised up, and it's
Right.
just as basically as uniform as you can get. But the first 5, 4.5, 5 feet is almost nothing.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Seems to me it's a lot of energy going into stems and leaves, and if you were to reduce your veg time a little bit, uh, over time, you'll be able to pull another garden out of there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that could be part of it. And I think under canopy lighting, different spectra of lighting, definitely anything that can penetrate deeper into that canopy. So I think there's still a lot to go through and make
For
some
sure.
better gains. But
Do you
at the
remember
same
our
time, I
ecosystem?
think it's difficult because the industry is tough.
Yeah. Do you remember the ecosystem, the garden, the ecosystem? You'd have to go back in time at least 17 years.
No,
All right. It
no.
was made by this guy, Régent Roy. He is a beautiful human being from Quebec. He was one of these inventor type people. You know what I mean? No educational background, other than let's say high school, but worked so hard and was so anyway, he just came up with this idea, made the molds, made the product, and it was a round plastic garden
Hmm.
where you hung 20 rock wool slabs inside of it. The doors open on both sides to get in. And then we would hang, when it first came out, this is crazy. We would hang 2,000-watt bulbs in there.
Right.
It had a glass tube in the middle, which we would take out. And we put fans on the top and fans on the bottom just to make sure there's tons of, and the plants would be 6 inches from 1,000-watt bulb, not burning the plant.
Wow.
Seemed again
Yeah.
impossible. Back then, with the guys who did it right, did it with 2 6s. We're pulling out 4 to 5 pounds with 600 watts, and it was by a landslide the best producing garden by watt that existed in the world, and it was
Amazing. Amazing.
vertical vertical
Wow.
sea of green, and the idea is how can I have a 4x8 garden where every plant is getting photons from just two lights? You, it's impossible to do flat. It's completely
Right.
impossible
Right.
to do flat. So there was not one photon that was lost. Not one.
It was that total greenhouse effect
It was
with the
wow.
sphere.
Yeah, it was because it
With
was
the
all
sphere.
inside this pod ecosystems. Anyway, amazing thing. Um, so again, you are a lot of your consulting work has been based around and is on organic growing.
Yeah, pretty much all of it. I'm way I'm totally out of my depth. I do get calls from this is in agriculture in general, but I'll get a call from a garlic grower who is using fungicides and synthetic fertilizers, and I just say, "Yep, I'm out. I get to tap out. I don't know that world well enough." But I feel very comfortable speaking around hydroponics and aquaponics, aeroponics with cannabis. But that's because I've learned a lot of that from other growers.
And you've done some really interesting articles for us on the subject, and we'll get into another one in a second because I have a whole lot of questions to go with it. When we did horizontal, I can't remember the guy there's
Leighton Morrison
Aidan
was the one
Morrison,
who,
right? So,
yeah.
and you did an article, which I went. I made a major effort to build this up, and I'll get on that for a sec. But I want to ask first a question and get your opinion and scientific opinion too on this whole idea of organic versus synthetic. Whereas I have tried both on every level of
Mhm.
organic. So I've tried,
Yeah.
like a BioBiz and cocoa. So my fertilizer, I've tried Geo and peat, when General Organics had their organic. I've done living soils that I bought with
Right.
teas. I've done everything. Like, everything. I've done your horizontal, horizontal. Anyway, and I've had some really good success, and I've also had some failures. I specifically had failures when I was getting into using the soil the second or third time and not
Mhm.
amending properly.
Right.
But where I've never had problems is in synthetics. And someone says, "Oh, well, the taste or the terpenes or the blah blah blah." I've never found that organic cannabis that I've grown is any better than synthetic cannabis, and especially like I don't overdo it. I'll run low on the ends. In the last couple of weeks, I'll do water for the last X amount of days,
Mhm.
uh, and so there's not like any buildup of nitrogen, and I don't know if that's even a thing. Um, and I don't know. The only thing I really notice is that the sun when I grow outdoors, and I last year was all in autopots with canna.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think it was just synthetic. I've always grown outdoors organically, indoors synthetically. But last year I just tried this. Um, And I just find the sun has a big difference on terpene expression, but not so much the way I grow in the basement. So what's your feel?
When you said, yeah, and I mean, just to get to around the organic and conventional, uh, I feel like that really comes down to a good, like, you probably have tasted some bad hydroponic, just like you've tasted bad organic, and you've Is
Yeah. Well, the bad to me has been more like it wasn't grown properly. There was they screw up, so the plant didn't mature properly, or most likely historically it wasn't dried and cured properly.
Right, right. I think so much can be done with that drying and curing, and I do believe systems are different, and and even organic versus conventional. If you're doing um, a living soil bed, you may have less control of how green that plant is at time of harvest. And so if you're harvesting a plant that's got still a lot of active chlorophyll, you probably want to do a different system of defoliation or drying and curing that's going to allow for, avoiding that kind of hay, grassy, ammonia kind of taste to it.
How would you alter your drying and curing to avoid that?
Some people will try to do a bit of a a little more heat at the beginning part, then go down. So you definitely could be affecting some of your mono terpenes, but then and then it's going to be a slightly longer cure, or longer drying down period, and probably a longer curing period.
And what's the science behind that? Why would that change?
Just to get rid of some of the deleterious tastes and aromas that come out of having green grassy type
Yeah.
materials in there.
So
Yeah.
where's the greenness going if you change his drying? Because
It's
nitrates,
it's just
nitrates.
gonna be it's in that kind of, that whole magical,
Hmm.
part of curing where, I'm not sure if it's a fermentation breakdown or enzymatic breakdown, but a breakdown of those, um, tastes and aromas that we don't want,
Yeah,
right?
that I've been going for 25 years. I used to trim for a buddy way long ago, and was just so impressed, with his grow room and the fact that he was growing, and I so I've been growing for 25 years, and my Achilles heel, absolutely the hardest bit I've ever, every problem I've had apart from thrips and mites, whatever, and powdery mildew, is drying and curing. Here in
Mhm,
Quebec, it's either too
mhm.
dry or too humid, and there's like 2 weeks in between a year of those seasons that it's not that. As soon as the snow melts, it seems to be too humid, and all winter it's too dry. And so I had this product called Odor. It was this great
Right. Yep,
setup door. Oh, you've heard of them?
yep, yep.
From the UK, that, I set up, so then I had a drawing room, because my grow room and my equipment room are attached, and I bring the dehumidifier in there, but of course I didn't have an AC in there, and the dehumidifier would warm up the room so I could keep it dry. So, and then I had to turn it off, and oh my god, it was a nightmare, and that was me doing it right. Um, and then finally, a year and a half ago, when I say blessed, man, some customers, I just want to send them Christmas gifts. There, it's Canatrol. So
Right,
I
okay,
got one
yeah.
of these Canatrol machines.
Mhm.
Now I have 2 of them, and, I mean, again, a shameless plug, anyone who doesn't have one of these and has trouble drying and curing, or wants to always really do a good job to spend the 1,000 or whatever bucks it is, it's, oh my god, it's the best money you could spend. It's
Right,
changed my life.
yeah.
Absolutely changed my growing life.
Yeah, yeah. I think you nailed it. I think cultivation wise, all plants are kind of going in there. Probably good and healthy. Or I mean, they may have some diseases, but it's really in that drying phase and perhaps in that curing phase that we tend to mess things up. So
Yeah. Well, I said I also equated it to golf.
yeah,
If
right.
you could drive and chip, and
Yeah,
you can be amazing at all that, but if you can't putt, you're never gonna win the tournament, ever. So, and now I one putt every time. That's my line
of course you do. Yeah, yeah,
for drawing, curing
yeah.
analogy.
Yeah, that's good.
Um, and is there a way, so if I grow something synthetically, and I don't, let's say, overdo it. Have
Mhm.
my
Yeah.
kids, and then I grow the same strain, same clone, even we'll say from the same mother organically, and then I would give these two to you to analyze however you want. Is there a way to
But
tell?
I think there you could,
Right.
in large part,
Right?
it would come down to um, looking at the Brix levels. So if you were to be able to analyze the two plants at
Why
a
would you get higher bricks?
depending on what form of nitrogen you're using, right? So if you're using a more of a nitrate nitrogen in a synthetic form, um,
Let's
you
say
w-
I'm not.
well, I mean, yeah, I'm just giving you an example where you may have
Okay.
lower Brix in a conventional grown plant than you might in a
No,
organic plant.
so I'm just gonna have
Now,
to
I
cut.
mean, you could still mismanage your organic system
No, no,
and
I'm saying
feed it with a lot of nitrate nitrogen as
everything's
well.
done perfectly. I'm assuming everything's done perfectly because I grow this one tomato plant. It's the tomato plant's name is Ray. It's a
Mhm.
tomato that my
Yep.
daughter started in school 5 years ago, and I've kept alive through clones indoors all winter,
Wow.
outdoors. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
family member now, and I harvest tomatoes out of my basement all winter, and Brix basically is just a fancy way of saying sugar, right? Is that isn't the amount of sugar, and obviously we can figure out Brix in a tomato with my mouth. I don't need I have a Brix machine, you know, that you look in and put the
Refractometer. Yeah.
yeah refractometer,
Mhm.
and I don't need that. I eat the tomato, super sweet, as sweet and delicious as any tomato you've ever had in your life
Mhm.
out in my basement with and I typically run it on the same res as the cannabis.
Right.
So
Right.
I don't even know what it gets, when it gets it. It gets whatever on the schedule. And in fact, it was Alex Gauthier who really got me going on just two part.
Right.
Now, I use some supplements now because I use Grow Genius and I use Mycorrhizae, and I'll put calcium, magnesium in for my tomato
Okay.
plant
Okay.
sometimes. I know it really wants it, but I've been running my cannabis pretty much well with AB,
Mhm.
and I'm not, and it's amazing.
Right.
I can't get over how and it's not that you don't need the supplements. I know if I add them, it's got to be good. Seaweed and humic and fulvic acid has to be good for a plant. They're so complex, and
Yeah. Yeah.
so you're just saying to measure organic versus synthetic. There's really not a big difference in the
I
chemistry of flour.
in sorry?
Like the chemistry, if I have them analyzed, there's not a big difference.
I think there could be. Yeah.
So what's the big
Yeah.
What's the
Well,
difference? I'm
I mean, it depends on how you grow organically and conventionally, but let's say that you chose different, like, let's say what we chose to do two, two flowers, both using synthetic fertilizers or both using organic fertilizers, but we choose different fertilizers. And one has a lot more nitrate, nitrogen, one has more soy amino acids, or you can definitely get great yield with the nitrate nitrogen one. It might look even better, but you would end up having very two different tasting um, flowers, as well as the shelf life would be quite different as well.
okay. And the nitrate nitrogen that's used in most synthetic fertilizers.
It would be in most of it in the grow phase, and then usually in bloom they might change to a more amino acid base or ammoniacal nitrogen.
'Cause that's what I think Athena has a unique nitrogen, right? They claim, I can't
I
remember
think
now off the top of my
I think
head.
they kind of focus. I could be wrong on this, but I thought they just use calcium nitrate both in their grow and in
I
their
thought it was
bloom.
that amino whatnot because they they have such a high EC, and the reason they're saying is because their nitrogen source is different. I've talked to other fertilizer companies that say, yeah, we use that nitrogen too. It's
Right.
not like,
Yeah, I
but
don't think there's
I don't know. Yeah.
anything unique.
Um,
Yeah.
now
So
in
yeah,
yeah, no, and then uh, do you feel, or maybe you just don't even feel? Do you know about in Canada? What's the percentage of legal weed that's organic, and does it get a premium? Does that do people pay more for organic cannabis like they do for organic produce?
I don't think it necessarily. gains a premium. There's the odd customer that will walk in and ask for organic, and honestly, if the bud tender's not well educated, they're probably going to say, "Well, I know organogram," um,
Yeah.
right? But it does provide, in a market where you're trying to stand out in some capacity, people who are philosophically bent towards wanting to produce something organically at least can market around that, um, and so it becomes more of a niche market. I don't think it's garnering much of a premium, although there are some people who are export oriented, who are getting a slightly higher premium because they can market it as organic in
And
the UK as well as Germany.
now, when we're exporting to the UK, and Australia or Israel, I believe, where people are irradiating their cannabis if it doesn't pass microbial testing, whereas we cannot do this in Germany for export. They don't.
Well, you can. It's just there's a little bit more paperwork that has to be done before
Okay,
you.
I thought they did not accept irradiated weed in Germany.
Nope, they do. You just
Okay,
have
they do.
to go through a process by
Mhm.
which you um it is declared that it's irradiated, and then you have to go through some.
So my question becomes too, is growing organically, does that increase your chances of failing those tests? Do the endophytes,
Yeah, no,
could
it's
that
I
come
think
through
I
and
think
fail?
it's the opposite. Most organic flour would have lower levels of
Okay,
microbial populations. Yeah,
compared
because
to
they have a better immune system, um, and so they it could be the endophytes that are doing a lot of that,
that are
or it could
fighting.
be a thicker leaf surface. There's more wax production on a lot of.
That's super interesting. I never I that can we take a note? You wanna write me an article on that? I really like that idea. That's actually super interesting. I didn't know that. I would've
I mean, if when you look at, and this is what's interesting about, Alexander Gautier's, just using Grow A and Grow B and not using a lot of the other, myriad of supplemental products that you can be using. The supplemental products, for the most part, are 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 kind of like supplements, right? If
yeah,
you're eating healthy, relatively healthy, not too much processed food, blah blah blah, you probably don't need to have a big medicine cabinet full of um, omega-3 fatty acids and magnesium and vitamin E and so on and so forth.
yeah.
But in an organic system where you're trying to say that this is exactly what we need, we're going to put in a lot more insurance. That's why you get more like in a living soil. Typically, it's like a kitchen sink, or everything, including the kitchen sink, is put into those soils, right? I think the first soil I designed, it was based on a combination of Clackamas, Coots, Subcool's recipe, and the Rev's recipe. Um, there must have been like 20 different ingredients, and
Well, so I
then
would,
yeah.
I'm gonna it's a perfect segue. So when I first started working in the shop 23 years ago, it was the Cape Puss shop with the Walkley, so it was the biggest shop in Montreal. It was very busy, did very good business back then. We used to have something called the Dutch mix. So I don't know how Dutch it was, and let's see if my memory serves me, but it was a bale, a 3.8 bale of Pro Mix. It was Pro Mix
Comics, yeah,
we had,
yeah.
and then it was a bag of shrimp compost.
Okay.
It was a cup of guano, or we call it grow and bloom guanos, but the two, the insect eating bat guano and the fruit eating bat
Mhm.
guano. A cup each of that, a cup of bone meal, and a bag of earthworm castings, and
Yeah.
that was it. You mix that up, and they said that was Jaws of the time. Just add water.
Right.
You don't.
Yeah.
And I tried that. That was my first foray into organic. It worked amazing. We would throw it out into our garden after, and just always make it fresh again, so that way it wasn't, so 2 questions with you is, 1 is without listing, and I would love if you wanna send me a list of what those 20 things are, and I'll put it on, like, kinda right now in the podcast,
Mhm,
it'll pop
mhm.
up and show your mix. But do you have a favorite mix or a simple mix or a mix that people, could try that
No,
out?
To be honest, it's like trying to celebrate the grower. So if the grower particularly has things that they like, for whatever reason, they really love using kelp. I will work with them on their mix and say, okay, we'll add the kelp, but we'll make sure that we do this and this just to, we'll definitely do a COA on that kelp to make sure it's not too high in arsenic or something like that. But yeah, or if they have some byproduct that's close to them, right? So if they have a crab meal that's really close and that they can source, or they've got bark mulch that they can source, I'll work with whatever they have. When it comes down to it, is kind of formulaic. You're going to have some type of form of nitrogen, a phosphorus form, and a potassium form. So we're going to do all that. Then, and honestly, the only thing that I brought differently to like Subcool or the Rev or Clackamus's recipe is I said let's throw in a huge amount of a microbial inoculant. So when you think of cannabis, and even especially an indoor cannabis, you've got a relatively short life cycle,
Yeah.
right? So in a just add water system, you really need to have great nutrient cycling going on. And honestly, the best way to do that is to make sure you've got enough microbes that are constantly producing
Oh,
the
I
byproducts.
was a huge fan of Mammoth P when it came out,
Mhm.
and Colin Bell, who's been a guest on the show, is a good friend of mine, and he has for 15 plus years been my go-to guy when I have questions. Although you're starting to become one of them too, because you actually answer your phone. Not that he doesn't, but you're very available and very very gracious with your time and your knowledge. Um, but and like making these soils and trying to find something that is unique to cannabis or works for cannabis, I think I would not want to tell you what I like. What do I know? I'm not a soil biologist or a PhD in anything. There's so much bro science in cannabis
Mhm.
going. I'm sorry, my mix also had a cup of seaweed in it. Um,
Right.
the Dutch mix.
Yep.
Um, that I just followed somebody's mix in the day, and I would love to know who came up with that mix because it seemed quite thrown together. Um, that there's a lot of again, bro science and not science. And one of the biggest problems I have, which will lead into my next question, is amending these soils. So when I did the horizontal mix off of the article you wrote, and the gentleman you mentioned earlier, um, first of all, it was a boatload of work finding. I had to go find local silt.
Right.
Local
Yeah.
silt. Where do you use one find silt? I live on a river, so it wasn't that hard. And sand and this. And then I got all my terroir, all my soil came from the forest. So I
Mm.
really made a
Yep.
mill where I live. Terroir, it's what it was. And the first run was amazing, like,
Okay. Wow.
God, I was so sold, and I said, and I was adding biology, and I thought I was doing everything right, and then it took me just one time and over dried a little bit, and I thought, oh, I must have fucked things up, and I finished, and it was all fine. It was on one of my trips, and the next grow didn't go as well,
Mm.
and the, and the
Mhm.
third grow didn't go well.
Mm.
And I'm like, and I had added biology. I had made compost teas. I added it. I think at that time, um, Microbial Mass was just launching, and I was maybe using that product, and then at the end of the day, because each of my garden beds must have weighed 500 pounds because of the rock slayer and the sand and the silt and oh my god, um, and I was like, like cursing that garden at the end because the third run it was not working. So how does one amend when you're trying to do no-till style gardens or building cannabis gardens and you want to be organic, as I do with all of my food gardens, which I amend
Mhm.
every year,
Yeah.
great success. They do amazing. And an indoor cannabis garden. So if I build a nice soil, what should I be putting back in between, or how would you
Yeah.
recommend to
Yes, and just a little bit about the horizontal system. It was just trying to say let's try to mimic natural soil, because we say that we're using living soil organics, but soil by definition is sand, silt, and clay. That's
Mm,
kind of the soil science definition: sand, silt, and clay. Well, there would be very little sand, silt, and clay in a typical living soil operation, right?
yeah,
So, it's mainly going to be peat, cocoa, worm castings, and then perlite, and then you put whatever amendments you want, right? Which very few of them would actually be sand, silt, or clay. Although if you are using something like a glacial rock dust, then you sort of have a bit of a sand component there. Um, oftentimes what the idea was, let's mimic that, and so then the roots can kind of bottom feed, so they're really gaining a lot of their water through the where it'll be in the rock layer down there. Um, but what is most important to do is in that O horizon, that top horizon. Um, it should be about 6 inches, and that's what you have to do a sample. Usually about a week before harvest is what I recommend, is to do a soil sample, send it off to a lab, get an analysis, and then you know what it is deficient in, right? So you might see that it's low
You
in magnesium, low in
take a
um,
couple samples too. You can't just take one sample from one spot. That's what I was,
right, yeah,
which is
yeah.
why I never did it, because I'm like, there's no fucking way that a hobbyist is
Yeah,
gonna.
is going is going to do that. But you know, we kind of have an understanding around, if we're watching our plants well enough, then we know that, oh yeah, it looks like it's running low in nitrogen, or it's running a little low on magnesium, potassium, whatever. We can see some of that. With phosphorus, you're going to see that purpling of the petioles, so on. So if we understand how that plant is telling, what the plant's telling us in terms of deficiencies, then we can do some um, hopefully some remediation that way. And then there's always the opportunity to do foliars if it starts to crash on you. But
Yeah, which I
but
do.
yeah, yeah, it's not something that you can kind of do without kind of doing a little bit of testing, because even when you know, we often will use something like CalMag. CalMag is just something that's going to treat a symptom, right? Because I think I did write an article on that because, you know, for the most part, too much calcium means that you'll have too little magnesium. Too much magnesium usually means you have too little calcium. So it's hard to know what's causing your
That's
problem.
pretty funny when they come in the same bottle.
Yeah, yeah, because
Well,
it is a fix all.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
there is. Well, yeah. There's that one product from Keto Life called Cal Nomag. I don't know if you.
Oh,
That's
okay.
just
Yeah,
just calcium,
yeah,
but
yeah.
there you go. And what do you have coming up? Do you have anything interesting in terms of your work in general? You're not writing a book or anything.
No, not at all. I mean, as I often say, I'm always trying to exit the cannabis space, but I never seem to leave.
Why don't you do
But
that?
but I yeah. So there's some other projects that I'm working on that are outside of cannabis.
Yeah, good.
But you know, where I was most interested in, is like your comment around your outdoor grow, uh, and it may be lower in cannabinoids, maybe even higher in terpenes, but I still think the flavonoids, we're nobody's really testing them, although High North will test for flavonoids. They just, nobody asks to get them tested. I still think flavonoids have a big role in the whether it's the entourage effect or just in the high effect. Because I always like smoking my outdoor weed way more than all of these amazing growers who produce great looking bud. My bud never looks great, but it always gives me a better feel.
Yeah, well, it's, you and thank you for asking me to be on that grow up panel I was on. That was the first time I've actually
You
spoken.
did amazingly well, and could
I
be a
wouldn't.
regular now.
I don't know. Maybe I don't know. It actually gives me anxiety, but I guess everyone gets that because I always feel, what do you call that? I can't remember the name there. I feel a little bit like a phony. I'm sitting up there beside Riley Kirk. Riley Kirk is sitting.
Yeah,
She is. Again, if you talk about people that I hold in the absolutely highest esteem of knowledge and presentation style, and how many podcasts and she's been on. I mean, I
right.
really
Yeah.
felt like, okay, well, I'll give you all my opinion on what I think
Yeah,
about
of
it.
your own. Well, and that's it. It was very valuable. I mean, you actually researched your opinion as well.
Well, that's true. I mean, I asked people, but you know, and then you know, we've discussed this at length because I also have that Cherry West variety, which I talk about all the time. That I think it tops out at 19%. I don't know what the terpenes are; they're very, very high. And I often joke that you could dry this stuff in the oven and you will not lose your terpenes. It is just it
Is it
retains this. It's so pungent. It's
is
so
it black cherry
amazing.
pie?
No, it's just Cherry West from Freeborn Genetics
Okay, I'll look it up.
in California. It's Mean Gene from Mendocino. You heard of
Mhm.
Mean Gene? Freeborn Genetics. It's sold by Alpine Seeds. Anyway, a friend of mine, and so I tried that strain years ago, and it was I had the same feeling that 20 years ago or 18 years ago I was in L.A. visiting shops, and this guy at the shop says, "I got the best weed in Southern California," and he was a very bit of a brash guy, and I'm like, you know, sure you do. What am I gonna say? Fuck, you know? I'm like, yeah, I bet you do. I mean, you know, he's like, well, do you want some? Of course, I want some of the best weed in LA. You know, like, yeah, I want to see. And so I thought this guy was full of shit. You know what I mean? Like, totally
Mhm.
full of shit. And he brings me to the back of his car, and he's got some one of them. I say boats, you know, like late '70s, early '80s caddy or whatever it was. This
Oh,
big
yes. Yeah,
old
right.
car,
Yeah.
giant trunk, expecting to have bodies in it. You know, and he opens into a trunk, and he's got kilos of weed in there. I'm like, dude, talking shit, you know, like,
It's
and
20
he has
years
a
ago.
bag in a bag, whatever it was, and he opened it up, and it was the first and the original of that OG Kush, that
Oh,
real
wow.
OG
Wow.
Kush, and I had never smelt anything like it in my life. That punched me in the face, and I looked at him, I'm like, "What the fuck is that?" And that's the same feeling I got from that Cherry West.
Okay.
When it was first starting to flower, and I'm like smelling it, I'm like, "What the hell am I growing?" I was so excited. And it topped out at 19, and I absolutely destroyed people with that weed.
Mm, yes. Yeah.
Big my sister's boyfriend, who's a big smoker, like,
Mhm.
he smokes way more and edibles way more than anyone I know even, or, you know, up there with the Remos and these guys who just smoke all day and can smoke anything, and he says, "Good," 'cause I got halfway through that joint, and I found myself lying down on my
Mm,
living room floor staring at the ceiling. I'm like, he goes,
right.
"That's the most stoned I've been in years."
Yeah. Yeah.
And he just buys the strongest he can always find. And this 19 was stronger than any 30 he'd smoked. And I'm that's when the question started to come up. Again, this is years ago. But
Mhm.
yeah, there's so much more to weed than THC in terms of getting high. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
and I agree with you. I will take a 14 to 18%. I'd rather smoke that than a 30%. And I still get similar effects. And if you smoke 30% all the time anyway,
Mm. Yeah. And your Cherry West, that's always done outdoors?
you know,
Oh,
it was
you do it
almost
indoors?
always done indoors. I
Oh,
grew it outside once.
yeah. Do they taste the same? Do you
Nothing. It's
remember?
always better outside. Everything
Nice.
always tastes better outside is my experience. Something in the UV and the IR and the spectrum of the sun and the power of the sun,
Mhm.
um, cannot be duplicated indoors. That's my opinion. I
Yep.
Everyone's, you know,
Yep.
welcome to tell me I'm wrong.
Well, maybe
I
that's my
have
next article.
Yeah, you know, I've grown with everything. I still believe CMH is probably the best light. I'm actually quite excited to deal. I'm gonna do a light change. I have my new DLIs. I'm never gonna change them. They're good for 15 years. I won't have any light degradation because I run them at 60%,
Oh,
and I
wow.
have more micromoles than I probably need at Canopy.
Mhm. Mhm.
So every like 3 years, I'll turn it up 10%.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And by the time I get to 100%, I'm gonna be like old. Or, and I had the UV. I had the DLI UV in there also, so I'm getting this extra UV, and it works. So the plants are fucking gorgeous. But this matrix light is a CMH,
Mhm.
400-watt CMH surrounded by LEDs in a square
Oh,
fixture.
wow.
I'm
Interesting.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
I've been wanting to go back to the CMH for ages, but I just like the LEDs and
So the it'll just refract slightly different. So it'll still dispense or
it's a little reflector in the middle, you know, not
okay.
very big. It's got a 400-watt double-ended ceramic CMH, and then it's got the square
Mhm.
bands of
Wow.
I like
That'll be great.
totally
And
down.
and did covers like a 4 foot by 4 foot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
plus or minus.
Interesting.
That's the space I have,
Yeah,
so it's gonna cover a 4 foot by 4 foot.
yeah.
And I have a pretty
Cool.
old LED one that I've been meaning to switch out for a while, there. So, yeah. I'd also wanna say in terms of just, ego boosting you a little bit, how impressed I've been with the work you've done at the Grow Up.
Hey, thank
It's
you.
not the biggest conference, but it has amazing talks, be it both what you did on the with the Canna group this year, because I know you did the master classes, and in the past you've done from all of it to half of it to whatever. You're a wonderful moderator who always says that
It's,
you're a shit
I
I'm
mean,
a shit
it
moderator.
is, it is pretty easy pickings. We've got some phenomenal growers, and many of them, like you say, about yourself, they're a little nervous to get up there and speak, but then they realize they're just talking to their peers, and it's nothing. It's nothing. It's a smoking circle without the smoke.
Well, it
And
is that, and again, I recommend anyone who's interested in the Canadian market to go to these shows. Like I said, they're not massive. Don't expect a Mary Jane Berlin or an MJ Biz, or it's a small. It has a little bit of that warm, fuzzy feeling of shows of yesteryear when the industry was different
right,
and
yeah,
it hadn't been sectioned off into, commercial grows and then equipment, which is really there's no shows for equipment anymore, the way it used to be. And it's just something special about it, and it reminded me of the early Indo expos in
yeah. I think
Colorado.
you told me that. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
and there
sounds
was a
amazing.
gentleman named Mike Marquez who's one of my favorite people in the industry also, and he did such a good job,
Yeah.
and he doesn't have your
I
pedigree
I
background
think
w
I went on YouTube and looked up one of those Indo expos, and it was pretty amazing because it felt like a kitchen meeting.
and it was big.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
Yeah.
probably 10 times the footfall
Oh, yeah.
a grow up. They had the Denver one had lineups out the door, down the road, because it was people wanted seeds, and it was all about getting the seeds at that
Okay.
time.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
a lot of the early shows, it was the crowds came to get the seeds. It's
Mm,
always smokers make the crowds. It's not growers make the crowds,
yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that's where MJ Biz was so interesting because it was this 30,000 B2B
Right.
show.
Yeah.
So Mary Jane Berlin was amazing. 80,000 tickets, maybe 60,000 people there a day. It was insane, but it's 90% people there just have a good time and have a smoke and it's, but, and is there anything else you'd like to close this up with in terms of what you're working on? What you'd like any of our people to know about you or
No,
read?
not. I mean, it's just I think some of our biggest challenges in the Canadian cannabis industry is that we don't have enough vocal consumers to help us, because like C3 just went under, right? Or has temporarily set back. That's our national lobbying group. So we actually don't have a voice in Ottawa anymore. Um, and although I like to put a lot of blame on the federal government, it is our provincial government that is receiving, 3/4 of the excise tax, and then on top of that, putting on a provincial tax and so on, and then having their own margins for Cannabis New Brunswick or NSLC or um, OCS, whatever. Um, that I think the most we if we really want to secure long term, the monies that are coming in from cannabis, I think we need more consumers being vocal about, hey, what are you doing with those excise tax dollars? How can we make sure that our cannabis industries are being supported? Because when the U.S. does start increasing their export, we will. I mean, export has saved the Canadian cannabis industry,
I mean,
um,
you
and
you see that, but in 2025, recorded we did 500,000,000 in exports and 5,000,000,000 in domestic.
right, but that 500 million would be what is saving a lot of
Yeah.
people, right?
I mean,
In
it's still a
terms
lot of
because
money. I don't wanna
that's not
500,000,000.
excise tax,
Yes.
and so on. So
Yeah.
without that, I mean, we're still in that. We're going to lose a lot of license holders in the near future,
You
but
think?
Yeah, anything we can do to try to get more consumers engaged in being vocal about it, because they're certainly not listening to the license holders.
Mm, that's interesting. Well, again, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show, Av. I think that you are an amazing wealth of information and one of the most generous people with your time that I know.
Thank you. I mean, this is actually shorter than some of our phone calls, so
Yeah, I know, I know. That's what I said. These podcasts is basically just a phone call with me being slightly organized.
yeah.
So,
Thanks so
uh,
much.
anyone out there, if you do need consulting help, Av is for hire, and it's worth every single penny.
Or you don't even have to pay.
Be careful. Yes, don't take advantage of Av, or you'll have me after you and angry. Pay him for his time. Checks in the mail, Av. So listen, thank
It
you
always
so much
is.
for being
Thanks.
on. We'll have to do this again and find, when there's some big news that comes up or whatever, and we can have shorter form podcasts just to discuss and get your opinion on stuff. Again, so thank you for everything that you've done and that you do. I appreciate you so much. And have yourself a great weekend. And hopefully, we'll cheer together for Canada's soccer slash football in the FIFA.
Especially
And yeah,
especially against, South Africa and
it's going to be a good one. And we didn't discuss whiskey or Bob Dylan, so that'll have to wait for the next
there you
one.
go. Sounds good.
All right,
All right.
bud.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Okay. Bye, everybody.